Having said all of those things and all the good things, I want to talk tonight a lot about the future of Westernaires. That's the reason for the meeting. But I think it's not possible to understand the future very well unless you understand the past. So I have a very brief PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to use to talk a little bit about the past. Right. I think the title is fairly explanatory. Looking around the room, I see a lot of volunteers. One of the things that not everybody keeps in mind in this organization, and I want to emphasize it tonight, that Westernaires is a youth organization. I think I want to underline that. And that we teach self-respect, responsibility, and leadership through horsemanship and family participation. And it's those elements that go together. I've told people from time to time, but I'm going to tell you all tonight, how that mission statement came to be. It was sometime after Katie Nielsen died that we thought we ought to put together a mission statement. We were encouraged by Dr. Jim Hurd up at CSU to do that. And so we brought him down and had some of our senior people meet with him one evening. And Dr. Hurd stood up and he said, "Tell me what you think the Westernaires is all about." And a lot of hands went up around, and we heard all kinds of things. We heard we're teaching kids to ride, we're teaching precision mounted drill, we're doing this with horses, we're doing that, and so on. And when everybody got finished, Dr. Hurd said, "I want to tell you something. If you think you're going to convince me that Westernaires is a top-notch program that teaches horsemanship, I will tell you that there are a lot of people in this country, a lot of organizations in this country, that do it better than you do." And that was kind of a slap in the face to everybody in the room. And then he said something that I thought was telling. He said, "You know, the one thing that you do better than anybody else is you teach kids how to grow up." And that's what our mission statement came from, was that recognition that what we really have is an organization that uses horses and uses the program that we have to teach kids what life is all about. And I think if you keep that in mind as we do the things that we do, you'll profit a lot, and so will the kids. We started at the Mississippi Stables at Mississippi and Wadsworth Boulevard in 1949 with 26 young people and 13 adult volunteers. That was the beginning of Westernaires. There, kids learned all kinds of things about horses. Most of them owned horses. Jefferson County was pretty rural, and most of you have heard the story, but for those of you who haven't, I will tell you that the Lakewood Youth Council came to Mr. Weiland, who was a horseman with the Lakewood Riding Club, and was a Mountain Bell executive on the side, or vice versa. I haven't figured out which yet. They asked him to set up something for kids and horses in the county because they had football and baseball and other things for kids, but they didn't have anything for kids and horses, and lots of the kids in the county had horses and so on. So Weiland went around at the Horsemen's Easter Parade in Easter that year and talked to a lot of the kids that were there on their horses to ride in the Easter parade with their parents and so on, and asked them if they didn't want to join a group of kids that would be associated in some way with the Lakewood Riding Club. Well, he got 26 kids, and they signed up, and they became known as the Paul Gregg Pony Club. Paul Gregg was the Denver Post artist. He was quite an artist, actually, a painter, and his color paintings used to appear on the front page of what's now the Empire magazine and the Denver Post every Sunday. Paul Gregg had died about the time the Westernaires formed their riding group, and so they decided to name the club the Paul Gregg Pony Club. And Mrs. Paul Gregg brought a flag out and gave it to the Westernaires. It had a horse on it, and it had PGPC, Paul Gregg Pony Club, on it. And I can't remember whether it says Lakewood on there or not, but I think it does. But those were the important parts of what it said on the flag. Flag is hanging up in the museum. So if you haven't seen it, you ought to go and take a look at it. It's been altered, because after about 3 years of being called the Paul Gregg Pony Club, the riders, which had grown from more than 26 at that point, rebelled. They said, "We're not riding ponies, we don't want to be known as a pony club." They had a big hoorah about it. Finally, Mr. Weiland came up with the name Westernaires, and that's where the name came from, and it stuck. And so now we're up to about 1952. 1954, Weiland got the Westernaires invited to come to Kids Day at National Western Stock Show. And we performed at Kids Day that year and the next year. And then the people that ran the rodeo decided they'd put the Westernaires in a rodeo performance the next year. That's 56. And we were a success. We got a lot of crowd applause. And so with that kind of success, they expanded our mission, and it's grown and it's grown and it's grown until now. I really got ticked off this year, if you want to really know, because they had one performance that didn't have Westernaires in it, and I didn't think it was right. But at any rate, that's what happened. But there's the 26, there's the beginnings of the 26, and there they are on their first ride down the highway. See that dirt road? That's Wadsworth Boulevard. If you really want to know what the beginnings of Westernaires was all about. Well, in 54, the fellow that ran the Mississippi stables, a guy by the name of Lonnie Arrington, moved out here, took over the place right across from the rodeo arena. We call it Fair Mountain today. I don't know what Lonnie Arrington called it, but he moved out there. And some of the kids in Westernaires had rented horses from Lonnie. So Weiland had a dilemma. There wasn't anything at Mississippi Stables anymore for them. So they moved out here to the brand new conceptual area called the Fairgrounds. There was a building here, and it was the livestock building. And there was a county commissioner that was working really hard to get this area called the Fairgrounds and to take it over and to begin to develop the fairgrounds. In fact, I was reading something one day about how really hard he had worked and how Weiland got him involved in the Westernaire idea as well. And so here we are, we're at the fairgrounds, but what are we going to do? There's no place to ride. So Weiland got the Lakewood Riding Club, the Buffalo Bill Saddle Club, and the Westernaire Dads together, and they built an arena over here beside the livestock building. When my kids joined, we used to call that the Lower Open. It's been torn down, and there's a new arena over there now in a little different place, but that's where that arena really began. And then pretty soon they built the rodeo arena on the top of an old dump up here. That's what the rodeo arena is. It's on the top of a dump. They didn't have any grandstands in those days. I've got a lot of great pictures of that area. But that's the way they rode for a while. And then about 1959, Weiland had been on a hunt for some property, and he finally found a realtor who put him in touch with Dr. John Hayden, whose family owned the Green Mountain cattle ranch, all of Green Mountain. And John Hayden kind of liked what he heard about what Weiland was up to with the Westernaires, and he had a couple of he had a plan in mind at one time that he was going to develop this land, and he had platted a block of city land, and he gave Weiland half of that city block. It's the east half of what we call Fort Westernaire up there. Sort of the east half anyway. I'll tell you the rest of the story here in a minute. But the east half came actually to the county commissioners for the use of the Westernaires, and it was that way for almost a year when the commissioners discovered they couldn't legally hold land and commit to a long-term tenancy under the laws that existed in Colorado at that time, and so they deeded it to Westernaires, and that's how we've got a half a block of land. And this was the plan that Weiland had designed for Fort Westernaire. You'll see we have two arenas to ride in, an upper and a middle, and then we have a lower property where we're going to have some meeting rooms and other things. And that was the design for Fort Westernaire. We had our first annual show out here at the fairgrounds in the livestock building. Think of that. There's proof right there. I went to a bull riding in that arena Saturday night. It was pretty good bull riding. It's a small arena, but it handled it pretty well, and I suspect it handled what we had there. But I think that's a great picture, and I love to share it. That's the hillside. That's the half block of city land that we got. Looks pretty good, doesn't it? That was Green Mountain in those days. There's another view of it. You get some idea of where we built Fort Westernaire, and we had to have buildings. So there was a fella over at 32nd and Kipling, a wealthy oil man that had a big farm there, and he was going to develop his farm into some housing. You drive along Kipling, just south of 32nd, there's a whole bunch of houses on the west, and those were the houses that he was getting ready to build. And he had his barn and some other buildings there. Told Weiland we could have those. All we had to do was get them out of there. So, what did we do? Westernaires put it together, got some dads together, and out they came. Now there's two stories that go with this that I think are worth telling. First one is that we had this truck turning onto Indiana Street there. That's pretty impressive to me that they could make that turn. I don't know whether that's Indiana Street, by the way, but at any rate, when it turned off of Colfax onto Indiana Street, the state patrolman came off of 6th Avenue. 6th Avenue was not paved by then. It was a dirt road, but it was a state road. And the patrolman came off and confronted the dads that were driving this building out here and said, you can't do this. This is over wide, and you don't have a permit. And about that time, one of the dads that was helping, or one of the people that was helping, was that county commissioner that I mentioned a minute ago. He came around from the back of the building. He said, officer, he says, you've got it wrong. I'm Jefferson County Commissioner, and this is my road. And you don't have any jurisdiction here. And the state patrolman looked at him for a minute and said, well, you may be right, Commissioner, but 6th Avenue is my road, and you're not going on 6th Avenue. The next morning, as if by magic, that building was sitting up on the hill over here, and nobody knows how it got there. That is today what it was designed to be, and that is the museum. And there's how it sat, and there's the beginning of Fort Westernaires. Kind of impressive, isn't it? From the smallest little acorns come these things. Now there are a couple of buildings in that. You see the building that's on the back of the museum, the barn. That's a 2-story shed which had some stalls at the bottom and hayloft in the top. And that's the auditorium upstairs and the part of the museum now. When my kids joined Westernaires, that was called the lounge, and it was the biggest meeting room on the grounds. That's where all our meetings took place, in that little room where the Lincoln carriage is in the museum today. And it was all fixed up pretty nice. Had drywall on the walls. I never knew what was behind the walls until we tore the drywall off when we expanded the museum in 2005. But at any rate, you get some idea of what's there. Oh, this little tall building right here in the foreground, that picture is, by the way, reversed, just so that you know it's backwards. But this tall building, that was the sewing room. The upstairs, at least, was the sewing room. After we joined Westernaires, that burned down. That was the first fire that I know that occurred out here. But at any rate, they got it finished. It looks like Weiland's plan, doesn't it? That was the beginnings. But it didn't take long. This is about 1960, 61 that you're looking at right here. Didn't take long before that was not suitable any longer. And Weiland agitated for building an indoor arena. And we had, by that time, acquired the adjacent half block. You see this half block over here where the Quonset hut is? That was a half block we got for back taxes. Redeemed the certificate, got the back tax property deeded to us, and that's where we got that property. Oh, I forgot to mention one little thing. When the county deeded the property, the half on which the museum and everything sits, to the Westernaires, they put a stipulation in the deed that if the Westernaires ever quits doing business out here, that property reverts to Jefferson County. Keep that in mind because it's an interesting story. The other half block where the Quonset is Westernaires outright. By 1975, it's kind of hard to see this whole thing because it's the whole picture, but you can see the little fort stuck up there, and that piece of ground that looks like something's happened to it out in front of the fort, that was a midget car racetrack. Those of you who've been around will remember when that racetrack was there, and that was a big piece of business on the fairgrounds. Those little cars running around all the time. When they weren't running around, Westernaires parked on that. But mostly we parked out in front of the fort on the dirt, on the road down to the county. The road went right down through between this building and the livestock building. The road went right down. That's how you came into Fort Westernaires, up that road. Well, we didn't quit. We sort of expanded. A lot of stories in between, but what happened was there was a red arena built and then there was a blue arena built. The blue arena was finished in about 1976. That blue arena has an important part in our history, but first things first, Weiland passed away in 1983. And by 1986, we'd had a little bit of difficult time getting along. We'd done a lot of things, you know, the rumors. I started talking about rumors tonight. When Weiland died, the rumors were that Westernaires would fold, that they had no money. The last part was probably true, the first part wasn't. We had somebody even quoted in the paper saying Westernaires wouldn't last 18 months. And suffice it to say, it's lasted a little longer than 18 months. At any rate, by 1986, we were humming along and we had an invitation to go to Canada in March. And the really exciting thing was that we graduated almost the entire red team at Stock Show. I didn't have a single flag rider left, and I had about 8 girls was all I had for a team, and we put it all together after Stock Show. And in early February, the red arena burned down. That was our only indoor practice arena, and it burned down. So we practiced the rest of that year in the rodeo arena over here. By then it had grandstands, but that's where we practiced, and fortunately the weather was good all that spring until we went to Canada, and we had a pretty good time. Well, 1997, the blue arena, after we rebuilt the red arena, the blue arena collapsed under the weight of a heavy snowstorm about a week and a half before annual show. I'm telling you these stories about the way things fell apart because I think it's important to know that the red arena, when we went to Canada, we didn't know what we were going to do for that arena because it was burned down. If you haven't seen it, go up into the AV room. The pictures are on the wall of that building when it was burned. The heat was so hot in that building, it melted the big steel beams. They sagged down. That's what you call hot. The fire department told me it was about 1,000 degrees in that room. And the blue arena was not damaged. Interesting. And fortunately, all of our saddles were in the blue arena. So we didn't lose all of our saddles. So in 1997, when the let me finish the story about the red arena. On the way to Canada, we argued back and forth about what we were going to do. We decided if we were going to build it, it had to be red. So we called around the country and we found a steel company in Missouri that would sell to us below wholesale on one condition, that we would come and get the steel and bring it back ourselves. So we got back from Canada and the dads loaded up the tractors, borrowed a couple of flatbeds and headed for Missouri to pick up the steel, brought it back here, and mostly dads built that red arena back where it had been. That's what I call dedication. So the blue arena collapsed, and the origin of our annual meeting of all Westernaires on Sunday morning started that year. I asked everybody to come for a meeting at annual show, and I said, folks, we got a problem. That blue arena's collapsed. We have no way to get in and out of the red arena with comfort. We've got to get that steel out of there, and we got to get things so we can operate. The next Saturday morning, everybody showed up. Some with Sawzall, one dad came with a crane that he had in his business, and by the end of that Saturday, everybody had moved all that steel out. We'd hauled it off, and that's the way the blue arena disappeared. Well, at that time, we were having an argument with everybody about whether the Westernaires was using the county property too much, and so we didn't rebuild the blue. We just let it sit empty. And I told the county that we would find a place and we would move. And I arranged with them to buy our property. Shortly after that, I got visited by the Jefferson County Fair Advisory Board. The fellow that was the head of the board at that time was a guy by the name of Stan Sowers. And he said, what would it take to keep the Westernaires where you are? And I said, I can't stay. We need 30 or 40 acres to operate. It's just too small, we're too cramped, and I can't do it. And he said, well, stay tuned. And I was getting ready for trial one morning, and I was sitting in the basement of the courthouse, and the county manager came by and sat down at my table, and he said, how much land do you really think the Westernaires have to have? And I said, well, I think we need 40 acres. And he said, can you get by with 35? And I said, well, maybe. And he said, well, how about if we add to your 5 the 30 acres that runs from the fence clear over to Indiana, and he marked a place out where it would go, and give you everything over there. And I said, you can't do that. The law won't let you do that. You can't sell it to me because part of it's open space and there's a commitment it has to be kept for open space. And the rest of it is, I don't think the county would let you sell half the fairgrounds to the Westernaires. And he says, maybe you're right. But he said, I do think I could get the county to agree to a permanent easement for the Westernaires to be on that land as long as they exist. And I said, that's a deal. We scratched it out on a napkin, literally, at the table. I took it downtown to one of my partners and had him draft up an agreement. He negotiated the agreement with the county attorney, and the commissioners passed it. And lo and behold, we have 30 acres out in front of our 5. Well, that's only part of the story, because a couple weeks later, after the commissioners passed that, I got a call from the clerk to the county commission. And she said, you know, we discovered something when we were going through all this. I said, what's that? She said, you know, that plat, you got half the plat from us. You got the other half of the platted block for back taxes, but she said the streets and the alleys on that platted block reverted to the county when the plat expired. And the county owns the streets on each side and the alley up the middle. Well, the alley up the middle runs right smack dab through the middle of the red arena and the blue arena. Thought that was an interesting alley. But at any rate, she said, don't worry about it. We've just recorded a deed conveying that to the Westernaires. So now the Westernaires owns all of that. Except when we went to a gathering to get the zoning done, there was a guy at the zoning who said, I own the property that's just to the west of you. I said, really? He said, yeah, it's 660 feet long and 30 feet wide. He had the other half of that street. And he got it for back taxes. And I said, what are you going to do with that? And he said, I have no idea. But he said, you know, I had nieces in the Westernaires, and if you could get me an appraisal for that, I'll bet I could donate it to you. So we got him an appraisal at the figure he wanted. He donated that land, and now we own it all. So that's how this all happened. And I wanted you to know that. We also do some things kind of an interesting way. We began traveling. We started traveling whenever we went in caravans, horse trailers behind pickups or cars. We'd go to shows, go to Trinidad. You know, it'd take an hour for us to pass any given point. There were that many cars in the convoy. Well, that's the way we used to travel. Then we got some old trucks. Some old Safeway refrigerated trucks, like the one that you see in the picture. And they had a fundraiser, and we bought a bus, 1952-53 GMC bus. Sometimes. There's a couple people in the room that probably helped push it a couple of times. It was not as reliable as we would have liked. There's probably some other people in the room that had to get off of it so we could get it up a hill, and they had to walk up the hill and get back on. But that's another story. But at any rate, we traveled. We have drivers that take us down. Look at that classy stuff. We had a horse band that was a Safeway truck and a horse band that had a cloth top and a bus. And that truck behind is our tack truck. That's the way we went to shows. And there's our original volunteer. All of this came from the dream that one man had. What you can do if you just don't take no for an answer and you get busy and get people involved. So that's what we came to be. That 60 years anniversary. You see all the people in that picture? That's from 26 and 13. And we're still doing that. We're still encouraging kids to develop some self-respect, some leadership qualities. Those are the things that we're trying to do here at Westernaires. So that's my story for tonight. Let me